Good evening, everyone. I'm Simon Young, professor in this law faculty, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this evening's panel discussion on political reform. And I'm glad to see that you've all managed to turn out, notwithstanding our very poor weather today, but it seems like it's managed to clear up now. So I have two purposes in mind for tonight's gathering. The first purpose is to hear a range of moderate views on political reform. And I emphasize a range because even within the moderates, there are different views. And I think this would be a great opportunity to express and to think about and debate some of those views in this forum. The second purpose is to have that open discussion. So I'm going to try to save a lot of time in this hour and a half that we've set aside for just free sort of discussion and debate. And so I've asked all the speakers to sort of keep their introductory speeches to just 10 minutes, so that'll give us lots of time. And I'm very proud to say that all of our speakers today have some current or past affiliation with Hong Kong U. Our first speaker is the Honorable Mr. Ronnie Tong, Senior Counsel, who of course is one of our distinguished alumni of the law faculty, and he really needs no introduction. Our second speaker is Mr. Law Chi Kong, who is also very well known in the community. He's a professor in our social work department and also a former legislator. Our third speaker, of course, is my colleague, Mr. Eric Zheng, principal lecturer, and also, as many people know, who runs our clinical legal education program, but he's also a very outspoken public figure. And our last speaker is Mr. C.K. Kwok, who's K.C. Kwok, honorary fellow in the School of Economics and Finance, and has worked with the Hong Kong government, but is more recently known as a member of the 13 Scholars that has been very outspoken on political reform matters. Right, so without any further delay, I'd like to call upon Mr. Ronnie Tong to give his opening remarks.
Sorry. Thank you, Simon, for that very kind introduction. I noticed that he referred to me as a moderate, and I wouldn't take exception to that description, but I do tend to think that moderate carries a connotation which is not really that positive, because moderate to a lot of people seem to suggest that you are going for the middle of the road, and therefore not the best aim that you want to set out to achieve. I don't regard myself as such a person. I regard myself as a pragmatic politician, and that is there is a great deal of difference between that and a moderate. Be that as it may, sometimes labels are difficult to get rid of, and so. I'm quite happy tonight to appear as a moderate, legislator. We're all here, no doubt, on the question of political reform, and everybody knows that the chances of successfully achieving political reform in, I don't know, maybe about 3 weeks' time are practically nil. And a lot of people are looking at me and trying to ask me the one simple question: where do we go from here? But I tend to think that in order for us to glean into the future, it is best if we can look into the future with hindsight. And I want to share with all of you tonight how I view the situation, or how do we get to such an impossible and sad position as today. A lot of people, not many people, but a lot of people in Hong Kong unfortunately including the pan-democrats, do not realize how far China has come since perhaps 1984, the time when Sino-British Declaration was signed. China has come a long way. And if you don't understand what is going on, it is very difficult for you to formulate your strategy to try to achieve democracy in Hong Kong. And unfortunately, that's where the pan-democrats fail. Economically, if one were to look back even to, say, the Hanover in 1997, our GDP around the Hanover represented around, I don't know, slightly over 20% of the GDP of the whole of China. Today, we represent about 3% of the GDP of China. In 10 years' time, and perhaps Casey in a minute can tell you, it is forecast that our GDP will represent something like 0.5% of the GDP of China. What do these figures tell you? They tell you that we're losing economic significance in the eyes of China. If the Basic Law were to be promulgated today, if the Sino-British Declaration were to be signed today, I'm not sure that you will get the compromise of one country, two systems today. Because we don't appear that important to China anymore. And let's not pat ourselves with, on our back too much. Socially, China has also seen tremendous change over the last 10, 20 years. There is an emergence of a middle class. There is an onslaught of the internet. And so Beijing not only has to worry about whether they can get double-digit growth or high number growth, but also how to manage aspirations of the middle class, people who are getting more and more in contact with the outside world. Politically, we see the return of the United States to Asia. And Beijing, and you can't blame them for having a besieged mentality. They want to become the second, if not the, superpower of the world. And they certainly do not want Hong Kong to be a pain, well, you know where. So you can understand, as far as Beijing is concerned, they even regretted having promised a timetable for universal suffrage for Hong Kong 10 years ago, in 2007. So this is a very different China. Unfortunately, the pan-democrats don't seem to realize that. And just a few weeks back, we, as a legislator, we have to meet a lot of consulates in Hong Kong, and consuls talked to me. One of them, who should remain nameless, he looked me in the eye and said, "Ronnie, I've been a consul for a good many years, and I've been around the world. I've never seen politicians like the pan-democrats. Can you explain where they come from?" Well, I said, "No, you have to understand where the pan-democrats come from. Traditionally, they come from grassroots groups. In the 80s, in the 90s. And unfortunately, they carry that mentality to today. And I said to the consul, I said, look, strictly speaking, we don't have any political parties in Hong Kong that is on the pan-democrat side. We have a lot of pressure groups. What is the difference between the pressure group and the political party? A pressure group, they exist in order to fight for a certain ideal. Their strategy is to ensure that they have a core group of supporters, which they would do their utmost to bind them together in a hard core, in order to generate maximum societal pressure. And they believe that if you create sufficient pressure, the establishment will succumb, will surrender, will kneel down and say, yes, I accept your ideal. That's the mentality of a pressure group. A political party doesn't work that way. A political party, they exist with the aim of becoming a ruling party. Their audience is not the core group of people who would create pressure alongside with pressure group leaders. The audience is the whole of the territory in which the political party exists. And that is why when I formed the Civic Party, I'm not ashamed to say that. I was the first and the only one up to now that when I formed a party, I wanted to become a ruling party. Not that you will actually become a ruling party, but you have to have the ruling party mentality. And that mentality is very different from that of the pressure group. So if you put the two things that I mentioned so far together, the emerge of China as a completely different nation since 1984, and the pan-democrats remaining as various pressure groups, you see the chemistry is bound for disaster. The pan-democrats think that if they create sufficient pressure, occupy Central, Beijing would get down on its knees. Well, it didn't happen. The pan-democrats advocated only one thing during the entirety of the political reform consultation period or before that, which is to ensure that one of them, or more than one of them, would be able to become a candidate. And that's why they advocated civic nomination, which I believe the last time we were here, I think everybody agrees that there is a serious danger of Beijing seeing it as outside the boundary of the basic law. Therefore, it represented a reluctance to accept the one country, two systems, a reluctance to accept the compromise that was struck some 30-odd years ago. And therefore, that you can see that at this juncture, there is no possibility of the two sides even getting in the same room, let alone the same conference table. Now, I know that we're going up to Shenzhen to see Beijing officials in a few days' time, but I can assure you nothing would happen. Nothing would happen unless there is a change of mentality. And that is why, if I may advertise here, I'm doing my utmost to consider what needs to be done after the package has been vetoed. And I'm setting up a think tank and trying to set up an advocacy platform with the only one aim, which is to change the political mentality of the politicians in Hong Kong. Unless we learn to appreciate what is going on, unless we learn how to judge the other side, your adversary's reaction, unless we learn how to engage, I can assure you, we will never have democracy in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tong. Lots of food for thought, very interesting points. political mentality, political party pressure group. Our next speaker, of course, is a member of a political party, Mr. Law Chi Kong. In addition to his work at the university, is also a member of the Democratic Party for quite a long time. I believe you have a set of PowerPoint slides, and you're also going to be making reference to some recent survey data. Mr. Long.
Yes, thank you. I just want to show just a few slides to reiterate some of the figures that back up what I've said just 2 weeks ago. In fact, I have shut up for quite a number of months. The last time I saw a speaker in the public was in February, but then after that, I have sufficiently aroused a lot of conflicts within the Democratic Party. So I shut up for two months, and then 2 weeks ago, I decided to speak up again because basically I see, well, basically I only have 2 to 3 more weeks, and everything will be settled by the end of this month, I guess, before the actual voting. So I think, well, if I don't speak, I should shut up forever. So I did. The reasons behind is basically looking, I just want to show you from 2 sets of polls. One is by the rolling poll from the 3 universities, including Hong Kong U, Chinese University, and PolyU. It's a rolling poll, but I put all the data together since 23rd of April up to last Thursday, okay, with a total over 5,700 samples. The reason I put it all together instead of showing the rolling poll because I find it's basically a straight line. Basically, there's hardly fluctuation in the data, which basically means in that almost a month's time, there's hardly any changes in people's will. And to accept the government reform package, the numbers ranging from 43 to 47. So on average, it's 45.3%. And oppose is 38.8%. The other poll I quote was from the Political Reform Public Opinion Concern Group. A couple of people like Si Wing-ting and Fred Lee, Dick Ji-yun, etc. You probably seen them in the news. This is the 5th poll. This is the last poll, and the poll actually refer again to the government proposed reform package. And you find similar figures, around 50% say yes and 41% say no. Well, basically the views are clearly divided. That's all I want to show. The second slide, just to tell you what the options are. Now, if we are going to sort of negative the government package, you will expect around 50% of the people in Hong Kong disappointed, okay? Because they said they should be passed. But if you pass the government package, there will be close to 40% of people, Hong Kong people, they're not just disappointed, and they're quite mad. A mad, quote unquote, meaning they will be very angry, okay? They will be very angry. So basically the option is, do you want to disappoint 50% of people, or you want another 40% of people going mad, okay? Well, which one is better for Hong Kong? I would say, in the short run, passing the government's package is more likely worse than negativing it. Okay? In the long run, no one really knows. And it actually depends on how you resolve the short-run conflicts. And I'm not positive towards that. So I would say on the balance of probability, either way is likely equally bad. Okay? You pass it or you not pass it, it will likely be bad. As a member of the Democratic Party, I do not recommend to the Democratic Party that it should accept the government proposal. Basically, I said, yeah, the DP should reject the proposal. That's what I have told the Democratic Party. But my question is, can we have a third way? Instead of just looking at the government package and say you pass or not passing it, can we find a package that the great majority of Hong Kong people will accept? So again, let's look at the poll of the concerned group. I tell you the percentage of who will support the package if, well, say the first one, if Beijing commits that there will be further improvements after the 2017, then 67.1% will say, okay. And if the government change all the company or organization votes to individual votes, then 78.5% will say yes. If you have the none of above arrangement, there are different versions of none of the above, but I'll just keep it. Some people just say blank votes, but blank votes is very different from none of the above. Okay, some of you, if you look at the literature, you know that that there are politicians in UK and politicians in the US changed their name before the election to change their last name to none and the first name of the above, so that they tell the voters, if you vote for me, who is called none of the above, then I will resign after being elected, which basically means void the whole election and back again. So I use this none of the above as an illustration of the so-called the blank vote arrangement, that different version of it. And if there is some kind of version, which is basically by Professor Chen of this university, that particular version, then almost like 75% will say yes. The poll did not put the three things together, but you can imagine if you put the three things together, there is very likely will be something around 80% will say yes. Okay. I don't have the data, so I cannot do the cross tabulation. But I would expect at least something like 80% will say yes. Well, that is what I call the third way. Well, because if I look back to the basic argument that I want to make is about whether passing it or not passing, is it good or bad for Hong Kong? What we need to change is the first two bullets. Okay? If you find a package such that if you pass it, okay, you have fewer people feeling mad. And if you find a package, if you pass it, more people will find it acceptable, then definitely it would be better for Hong Kong. Okay? Well, that is only statistically, I would say, at least you will still have a significant portion of the public quite angry. Well, but I would say after 2 weeks now, I've been in a couple of radio programs, TV programs, etc. I will find this third way, probably no way. Okay, I find the emotions are still very high. Okay, the emotions on both sides are very high, and the mutual trust for any negotiation is basically absent. There's nothing there. Okay. There's no mutual trust at all. And I use this Chinese saying, 守株待兔, which I don't know what is the best way to translate it. To stand by a tree stump and waiting for a hare. Okay? Oh, well, sit by, well, yeah, basically it's not stand, they sit. Okay. Sit by the trees, maybe. I'm not sure you understand that Chinese saying. But basically, they're arguing, particularly some of the pan-democrats are saying that, well, at the end of the day, if we are going to have a genuine democracy in Hong Kong, it would depend on Beijing's blessing anyway. So let's wait until Beijing changes its mind. Like this couple of days when we're discussing the visit to Shenzhen, some of the legislators from the pan-democrats are asking whether the Beijing government or the Hong Kong SL government is going to table any amendment. Okay? And they're not prepared to do anything until somebody do the job for them. So that's why I describe them as 守株待兔. They just sit there and wait for an unfortunate hare to bump or kill itself by bumping onto the tree. Well, that's all I want to say. I would say within a couple of days, everything will be settled. And there's no need to wait until the actual voting on the proposed date right now is the 17th, right, Ronnie? It's 17th of June. So most of the time I spend this day is thinking about what next rather than what can be done before that. Okay, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Law. I found the data about public support when there is some kind of change to the current proposal being so strong. I found that data very interesting because I would have thought that would be a strong sign to say to the Pan Democrats that you should try to negotiate or try to come up with some kind of counter proposal. All right, our third speaker is Mr. Eric Zhang, and can I call upon you to give your opening comments?
Yes, thanks, Simon. I do not belong to any political parties, and for political reform matter, I once joined hands with CK with this what others call the 18 scholar proposal that we come up with this civic recommendation rather than civic nomination, and what we think would be a kind of moderate package that is totally in line with the basic law and the earlier decision of the MPCSC, but our proposal was rejected, and so this 18 scholars group no longer existed. And indeed, before the NPCSC passed its decision end of August last year, just a couple of weeks beforehand, I also joined hands to sign a letter with the other 38, including Jasper Zhang and many other pro-establishment figures, to urge Beijing to give us more room and more time for negotiations rather than passing a framework that would make genuine universal suffrage impossible. But unfortunately, MPSC still made a decision end of August. And under that framework, at that time, I think you can't really have genuine universal suffrage that would allow Hong Kong people a genuine choice as to who should be our CE. But looking at government's current proposal, it is the most conservative one, even within the MPCSC framework. All suggestions to sort of give more democratic elements to the proposal were not accepted. And indeed, during this time, I have on various occasions tried my best to talk to various people, including the CE, including CH Tong and some others, at least to think that even without withdrawing the MPCSC framework, whether Beijing could allow government to come up with at least some more reasonable proposals so that more Hong Kong people may feel at least agreeable to pass this package. For example, there are a few measures that I've suggested that I think can improve the situation. First of all, we all know that if the reform package can be passed for 2017 for the election of CE, the next reform will be for universal suffrage for legislative council. Of course, the thorny issue is whether the current functional constituencies will still remain in 2020. So one suggestion is that if there is a clear sign or signal that once the 2017 package is passed, then the next reform will be a genuine reform that can get rid of these functional constituencies. If that can be sent out, I think many Hong Kong people may be prepared to accept the current package. unfortunately, that is rejected. And another suggestion is that at least whether you can make it clear that this 2017 package is not the final product, and the new CE, after being elected, would have a constitutional duty to further review the CE election package with a view to further improving it. Again, that is rejected. And of course, the third suggestion is that at least within the MPCSC framework, whether you can adopt a suggestion along the lines advocated by the 13th scholar that at the last step, when the nomination committee needs to decide who should be nominated as the actual candidate, whether you can do it in the kind of list system, that is, you don't vote individually, but that is, the 2 or 3 of them in the list would be voted en bloc. That could prevent the kind of manipulation by the nomination committee. Again, that proposal is rejected. So, look at it this way. Look at the government proposal now. Indeed, it doesn't make sense politically, because basically, I have raised this question to government officials. I asked them, under the government package, is there any way you can prevent 601 nomination committee members to join hands together to manipulate the result, in the sense that they will nominate a person whom they want to be the CE, and then nominate 1 or 2 others who will stand no chance of being elected? And no one can give me any satisfactory answer, except that you got to trust the nomination committee member. They will hit the public opinion, etc. But we all know that the NC is the same as the election committee that is currently. Indeed, I'm one of the members of the election committee. I know how it works. And there's no way that this NC member will hit public opinion. They can actually say that the reason why we are the nomination committee is that we need to perform our role to scrutinize the view or the platform of the candidate, etc., to decide who is the one that can best serve Hong Kong, etc. They have all sorts of reasons why they decide to nominate a particular person. But in any event, it does make sense, because if I am a NC member, if for whatever reason I like Wong to be the CE, why should I nominate another person who can compete with Ronnie? I won't. Okay, so as I can join hands with another 600 NC members, so I would only nominate Ronnie and then nominate 1 or 2 others who stand no chance to compete with Ronnie. So that is not an election. Okay, so what can we do now? To be frank, I am not the sort of person that would just say no, whatever, okay? But I must say that it comes to the point that I think I've tried my best, and I can see that currently I can see no chance of Beijing giving us a genuine universal suffrage currently. And to me, I share CK's view that it's better not to pass the reform package today. On the other hand, I don't think we need to be confrontational. To me, I also share one point that I think we need to realize that now our contribution to China will not be on the economic side. There's no way we have any value to China on the economic front. However, to me, our greatest contribution to China is to maintain our core values and maintain our rule of law, even though we may not be able to move forward currently to have a more democratic system in Hong Kong. I think we can still just focused on developing our democratic values, maintaining our core values, and to me, I think that's something that we should proceed. To me, so that's why nowadays I tend to lose interest in talking about this reform package. To me, I think forget about the system. But I don't want to see Hong Kong getting more and more polarized and confrontational. I think that's my view.
Thank you very much, Eric. All right, we now move to our fourth and final speaker, Mr. K.C. Kwok, and I understand you have some comments on the nominating committee.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. We have already got a few speakers talking about the current situation, the issues to be considered, and so on. I want to go back to some very fundamental ideas that the group of 13 scholars put forward. Well, unlike the group of 18, we are still existent, we are still kicking and alive, our blog is still working well, and our ideas are still there for people to be considered. And I'll try to explain why. Well, at the very early beginning, we came, well, all the 13 scholars are largely people, predominantly people who have no political ambition, who usually didn't participate in any political activities. They are scholars, they are economists, they are various kind of people who just have their professional jobs and interests. But the way we saw the political reform debate taking place in Hong Kong was such that we were very worried, because we saw a polarization of views. We saw different parties getting more and more uncomfortable with the other, and therefore mutual trust is gone, and therefore the polarization of political views is not going to help. And therefore we came up with a set of proposals. The first principle is that it has to be合法、合憲、合法、合情、合理. I tried to translate this into English as in line with the basic law, in line with relevant legal requirements, suits Hong Kong's specific circumstances, and reasonable. The words are simple, but I think it incorporates in it a very important thinking that, well, first of all, you have to be in line with the law and the constitution. This is a fact of life. This is a reality. Hong Kong is part of this one country, two systems. You have to stick to the basic law. Like it or not, you have to stick to all those NPCSC decisions. This is the basis you have to work on. But then at the same time, the laws and regulations sometimes are not framed in a way that we like them to be. But there should be enough flexibility for us to propose ideas that could be used to interpret those rules and regulations in such a way that suits Hong Kong's specific circumstances and make them more reasonable. So we have some room for maneuver. But unfortunately, the political debate in Hong Kong for the last year or so did not take place within this space. Rather, the two sides just go further and further away from each other, and that is why we were worried. And the second very fundamental principle we believe is that, well, we are very practical people. We have our ideals, we have our wishes, but we also know that the real world lives on, vested interests, and people have very deep-rooted thoughts and interests. And therefore, reform requires consensus, negotiation. We won't underestimate the difficulties of political reform. And therefore, gradual and orderly reform is necessary. No matter how high your ideals are, you must work through the process step by step. And we also realize that, well, apart from local demands, you have to respect the concerns of the central government. They were concerned about national security, all those things. You have to try to make them feel comfortable before they will agree to your views. So with all those kinds of thoughts in mind, we came up with various ideas. But one very fundamental issue is, this is Basic Law Article 45. I won't go through the details, but I want to focus on the second paragraph. The method for selecting the chief executive shall be specified in the light of the actual situation in the Hong Kong SAR and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress. This is what I have already covered somewhat. The ultimate aim is the selection of the chief executive by universal suffrage upon nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with democratic procedures. There are a few important phrases here and there. But the first and foremost thing is the nominating committee, the existence of the nominating committee is in the basic law. It is stuck in the basic law. It will be with us until 2047, unless the basic law is changed. So we better look at it. So all the talks about civic nomination without coming back to this nominating committee are just not in line with the basic law. And whether the 2017 package is passed in the Legislative Council or not, this nominating committee will still be there in the next election, in the next election, the next election. So we better look at it. But there are some flexibilities, I said earlier on. It says that it should be in accordance with the principles of gradual and orderly progress. It should be in the light of the actual situation in Hong Kong. The nominating committee should be broadly representative. The nominating committee should work in accordance with democratic procedures. These are rather vague words, and there are a lot of freedom for us to interpret. And that is the background that we propose a whole range of ideas. These ideas are rather complex. I don't think I have enough time to explain them in detail, but I try to outline some of them. The very fundamental issue, as some of you here understand very well, and some of you may not understand very well, is that the election committee has 4 major sectors representing different sectoral interests. Basically, there are roughly 233,000 something persons who have the right to vote for the nominating committee members. There are also other firms and organizations. Altogether, there are less than 250,000 people or organizations who have the right to vote for members, to become members of the nominating committee. Well, for a population of 7 million, 5 million qualified voters, roughly 3.5 million registered voters, and so on and so forth, 250,000 obviously is not a very high number. A lot of people, therefore, are not represented. Obviously, there is a lot of room for us to think about how to improve the broadly representativeness of the nominating committee. Ronnie is well, if I'm not wrong, he's probably the first one who put forward this idea that the corporate votes should be turned into votes by the individuals. We didn't talk very much about how to fine-tune the existing arrangements because we thought that this is an important area. We welcome changes in this direction, but we also understand that if you look at history, the nominating committee composition has been changed a few times, from initially 400 members to 800 members to 1,200 members. But every time proposals were put forward to change the composition, the structure, and so on, you encounter a lot of opposition. At the end of the day, the structure didn't change very much. You just add another 400 members. The structure basically didn't change very much. And it was repeated again, the structure didn't change very much because of a lot of opposition, and the number increased by 400 again to 1,200. So we realized the difficulties of changing this. Actually, we should have talked about all these changes a long time ago, but we didn't spend too much time. We keep talking, arguing about true democracy, fake democracy, civic nomination, and all that, polarization of views all the time. We haven't spent too much time talking about this. So now when you say, well, let's reduce the number of agricultural and fisheries representatives, they have 60 representatives. It's not reasonable. Nobody cares. Nobody wanted this. They don't want to discuss it because those issues have been discussed in the past. They refused. Unfortunately, Hong Kong didn't spend too much time talking about this. But on top of all this, we came up with another idea. We thought that instead of changing the existing composition, which is going to be very difficult, why not think out of the box? We double the membership of the nominating committee, but with the additional 1,200 members, all chosen by universal suffrage. Everybody in Hong Kong with a vote to vote for a member into the nominating committee. And these new members together will be 1,200. The all 1,200 members, let them discuss how they want to change the structure, let them how to change, discuss how to change from company votes to individual votes, and so on and so forth. We know there are going to be, and there will continue to be a lot of arguments and debates and difficulties. But we welcome those changes. But on top of that, we want to introduce a new category of nominating committee members entirely chosen by universal suffrage. There are a lot of technicalities. We need to stick to the 4 sectors in the nominating committee. So there are a lot of technicalities involved. I don't have time to go through them. If you want, you could go to our blog and you will find the details. One specific sector, which is the 4th sector. The 4th sector now has basically the political office holders, like the National People's Congress members, the National Juncture, National Political Consultative Conference, or something like that. The Legislative Council members, some members chosen from the district councils, and so on and so forth. We suggest that, well, this is the political constituency. It's very difficult to change it, so we suggested instead, well, why can't we include former senior government officials, secretaries and deputy secretaries or equivalent, former members of executive and legislative councils, the retired former NPC, CPP, CC members, the unofficial justices of peace. Every year, the chief executive appoint a lot of people on the honor list, we can add all those people in. That will increase the number of voters in that sector from roughly 700 to 3,000, roughly. So this is another technical consideration. But basically, what we wanted to introduce is a whole new category of nominating committee members who will be chosen by universal suffrage. We have argued in different parts of our proposal that this is actually in line with all our constitutional and legal requirements. And then on top of that, we also came up with this idea of, to avoid the issues that Eric mentioned earlier on about nominating committee members, nominating candidates for the chief executive, which would, because of the composition of the nominating committee, because of various operational considerations, how do you make it more likely for representatives of minority interests? It may not just be the pan-democrats. We should not design a system that will make sure that the pan-democrats will have a candidate. Well, it may be, I don't know, same-sex rights. It may be, any other people. So there are a lot of minority interests that need to be protected. We want to have a system that will make sure that the nominating committee will have a process that will allow the minority representatives to have a reasonable chance to become a candidate. So we came up with this idea of the list, or Mingdan. Again, it's too complex for me to explain here. Well, at the end of the day, all our proposals were ruled out by the 831 decision. Of course, we are not very happy. We are disappointed. But having said that, as I said at the beginning, I think our ideas are still alive. Even if they could not be implemented in 2017, these ideas represent the direction where Hong Kong should think about. Because, as I said at the beginning, the nominating committee is stuck with us for another 30 years or so. So any idea of how to make the nominating committee more representative, more democratic, more open, and that suit Hong Kong's political system and demands better should be considered. And I hope our ideas would serve as a basis for us to consider further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kwok. All right, I'd like to now begin our discussion time. And if I could do that, I'd like to ask each of our speakers one question, just to get the ball rolling. Ronnie Tong, now you have labeled, or you've been critical of the pan-democrats and described them as requiring a change of political mentality, describing them as pressure groups, not political parties. Could they also, sort of use that same approach and criticize you in being fixated on a conception of a political system that gives strong emphasis to political parties, which bears no reality to our current system? Because, of course, our current system is one where even the chief executive cannot be a member of a political party. And you saw the government's response to that. No one seems to be really pushing that very strongly. How realistic is it to ever envision Hong Kong having a ruling political party? So that's my question to Ronnie Tong. Mr. Law, you have talked about whichever way you go is equally bad, and on balance you think we should say no. And I'm just wondering, what is your criteria for drawing this conclusion? Because it seems to me you've referenced to the survey data, so are you coming to these conclusions simply based on how happy people would be? Is it a purely sort of utilitarian analysis, or do you also approach this topic from other more objective criteria? Because people would have said that, of course, even with the government's proposal, we'll have a major shift in our political system, which we haven't had in a very long time. And that this could, and we really don't know, but this could potentially improve governance. It could knock out the incumbent from coming back as chief executive. And there could be a number of interesting things that could happen and that are positive to our political system. Do you take that into account when you come to your conclusions about being equally bad? Eric Cheung, I don't think anyone can dispute your final conclusions about what to do after we reject the government's proposal, which is to come back to core values. That I think most would agree with you there. The question, of course, is how do we do that? How do we go back and maintain core values, rule of law, developing democratic values? I mean, we've been doing that for since 1985, when we had an elected component in the LegCo. What more do we need to do from this point on? Mr. Kwok, I think your ideas are very interesting about the nominating committee, and many people have put forward different ideas, but you've seen how the government's responded to that, and you've highlighted in your presentation that this is not just the first time, it's a reoccurring thing. I wonder if it's ever sort of occurred to you that maybe there's something more fundamentally problematic here. It's not just that these proposals are good or not good, or government's misguided or not very wise in their choices. But what about the issue of process? Have you thought about whether we need a better process for trying to reconcile the different viewpoints that people have about how the nominating committee should be constructed or reformed? Our process right now is very simple. Government says, tell us what you think. They take everything in and they say, oh, it's too complex. We're not going to change it. Let's stay with what we have. Can we have a better process? And what is that better process? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Simon. I have a long answer and a short answer to your question. Short answer is guilty as charged. Long answer is you asked the wrong question. You asked the question as if politics is about a idealistic process. I think you're guilty, the same as Eric and Casey. You think in terms of what is reasonable and what is the right mix or right approach to political reform. I look at it from an entirely different point of view. I look at it from the point of view of results. Politics is about results. And, I heard Eric and Casey say, well, I mean, we've got lots of different proposals put forward. I was the first one who put forward a proposal which is wholly within the confines of the basic law and in line with international requirement. And they say, well, all of these were rejected by Beijing. But have we thought about the other side of the coin? All of these proposals were rejected by the pan-democrats. Even now, none, zero, zip of those proposals were accepted by the pan-democrats. You can look at the watershed of the 31st of August. To the left of that, you see the pan-democrats asking only one thing, which is civic nomination. And as I say, they use maximum pressure to achieve that aim, which is, first of all, electronic voting. They galvanize the community so that 800,000 people come out to vote in favor of civic nomination. And then they threaten that we will occupy Central until you surrender. They did not discuss anything, any of the proposals that all of us put forward. Had we discussed these proposals, there may be something come out of it. You know, on that side of the watershed, Beijing wanted to engage, but each time they were frustrated by the pan-democrats saying, no, I'm not coming. Or when they went up to Shanghai, they don't want to talk and they want to come back. And all these things happen in reality. And you can see, I'm not defending Beijing, all right? I'm just saying that Beijing officials are human beings, like you and I. They also have feelings. When I went up to Beijing a few weeks back, Lei Fei, he was really angry. He was an academic, basically, but he was angry. He was angry because he said, look, whenever I said something in Beijing, I got scolded by Eleanor for 3 days. How can we talk? We're not on the same page. On the other side of the watershed, you know, after the 31st of August, it's the same thing. The pan-democrats didn't say, all right, Ronnie Tong's proposal is quite a good one. Let's try to put that forward and negotiate with Beijing. Or the 13 scholars' proposal is a good one. Let's just talk about it. No. The pan-democrats said, no deal. I don't even want to talk to you. You just have to surrender. You have to retrieve, set aside the August 31st decision. It's unconstitutional. Now, when you say it's unconstitutional, nothing can be said about it. Because no matter how you change it, it is still unconstitutional. And nobody would accept something which is unconstitutional, right? I certainly hope not. I'm a lawyer, and some of you here, Eric is a lawyer, and you all understand it. So when you say something is unconstitutional, it means there's nothing we can say about it. You just have to take it back. So even up to now, I'm sorry to say, none of the proposals has ever been discussed by either side. And that's the reality. That's politics.
It's all right. It's all right. Well, when I look at politics again, I look at what the public wills are important considerations, although not the sole consideration. But then, when we're talking about one thing, which is, let's say, the so-called international standard of universal suffrage, well, to me, I do not have a sort of dichotomized classification of genuine versus fake universal suffrage. I only have a continuum of very limited freedom in universal suffrage versus the maximum what we can ever conceive. And in fact, in each society around the world, they have different degrees. The so-called international standard is basically there's no unreasonable restriction on universal suffrage in terms of nomination, voting, or being elected, etc. But the problem is, although we have an international standard on what is a genuine universal suffrage, we do not have an international standard of what is unreasonable. Okay? There's no international standard about what is reasonable or unreasonable. What is reasonable to the English, the British, will be unreasonable to the Scottish. They can be. So what is reasonable 20 years ago can be considered to be unreasonable today. So time, place, the context is an important determinant. And particularly when we're talking about the right to be elected and the right to vote, I would say the most important criterion of what is reasonable or not reasonable is the man on the street. If the man on the street say that, well, that is acceptable, well, the whole issue about why the international conference or our bills of rights talking about no unreasonable restriction is the basic assumption is that there are always needed restrictions, like age. You don't expect a 3-year-old to vote, okay? Although you can debate whether 16 or 18 or 21 should be a suitable age to vote. So the whole issue is what is unreasonable. And if people will find it acceptable, although they may not say it is reasonable, well, again, it's conceptual. I always consider it's a gray area between what is reasonable and what is unreasonable. There's something in between, okay? So in law, we don't write a reasonable universal suffrage. We talk about there's no unreasonable restriction. If anything that is acceptable, I would say that's very equivalent to not unreasonable. Okay? You can't accept things that you consider as unreasonable. So anything that you consider to be acceptable will be something over and above that is that is unreasonable. Okay? So if you have 80% of the people in Hong Kong say that is acceptable, I would say it is not unreasonable. So I would say that is, well, in the context of Hong Kong, given our present time and place, and the political circumstances, I would say with those amendments to the government proposal, it will meet that standard of not having unreasonable restriction as considered by the public of Hong Kong.
Okay, before I answer Simon's question, I just want to have a quick response to what Ronnie says, because I tend to have different assessment. Because even though on the face of it, the pan-democrat is always asking for civic nomination, but from my own contact with these pan-democrat legislators, I know that this is not their bottom line. Indeed, I know that Beijing officials know or knew full well that this is not the pan-democrat's bottom line. Indeed, we all knew that, for example, if the proposal made by the 18 scholars is found acceptable by Beijing, there should be enough votes from the pan-democrats to pass the political reform package. They knew about this, but they rejected it. So to me, don't blame the pan-democrat. Indeed, we are not lacking in innovation. The 13 scholar proposals, they are all rejected. Indeed, I've heard from one senior government official that his own view is that Beijing's line is always that, as is reflected in the framework passed by the NBCSC in last August. It's just that they found that, well, because the pan-democrat on the face of it was asking for too much, that gives Beijing a very good excuse to condemn the pan-democrat and put all the blame on the pan-democrat of being unreasonable. But it doesn't really make any difference, even if some of the pan-democrats said at the outset, like the 18 scholar, 14 scholar, to come up with some more moderate proposal that is clearly constitutional. It seems that end result is the same. Okay, anyway, that's my own experience and assessment. To answer Simon's questions, what we can do next. I think that basically there are several things that we can do. First of all, stay vigilant of any interference to our core values. In particular, we can see that nowadays, the sad thing is that I think the mainland officials to me, are interfering more and more in our internal affairs. And our rule of law is being threatened. All these core values, I think we need to be vigilant on this. Secondly, I think we should, when we talk about democratic value, I really want to see that we can develop a kind of value that we can respect others' view, even though those views do not find favor in our own view. In the sense that we need to respect diversity. I don't want to see the kind of violent actions taking place more and more coming in Hong Kong. I think, to me, I think that's not a good thing. And then the other thing is that to see whether we can do more to develop the civic societies. In particular, after this umbrella movement, I can see that the younger generation, many of them, are awakened. Indeed, we need to make sure that this awakened heart would not so-called die away or die down. Indeed, but of course, I don't want them to go to an extreme, to go to the extreme position, to take more and more violent action, etc. But so that's why, to me, it's always a good thing that I know that some youngsters, they want to take part in the district council election this November, etc. Even though I'm more pessimistic as to the chance of success, to me, I think it's still a good thing that if they can take part, because that is a learning experience for them. I think those are the things that I think we can do.
Yeah. Well, let me address a few issues. First of all, I want to address the issue of, very practically, there is an argument based on reason, and there is also an argument based on views. I mean, for the society to decide something, we can decide certain things based on reason. But then in reality, the public opinion, as reflected by the opinion polls and so on, says that majority of people want this, or they don't like this, da 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 da. But then, do all these opinion polls or the public opinion are in line with proper reasoning? Well, one could debate about it. The other dimension of this is that, well, there is reason on the one hand, but then there is political power on the other. Well, like it or not, you may have a lot of reasons, but then the political power rests with some people who says, this is what I want to do, and this is it. Take it or leave it. And I don't necessarily mean only, the political power in Beijing. There are also a lot of political power locally who refuse to adopt reasonable changes in the eyes of most people. So I think there is always a tricky balance, You have to accept the reality that, well, these are the different forces you have to deal with. At the very early beginning of our deliberations amongst the 13 scholars, for example, there is a very simple argument, told to us by people very close to Beijing's views. They said, well, the logic is very simple. I don't know why you guys are so upset about it. Look, what you had in the old system, the election committee, 1,200 people, decide who is your chief executive. And now we take a major step forward. Now 5 million people, 3.8 million whatever registered voters will decide who is going to be the chief executive. This is a major, major, major step forward in Hong Kong's democracy. If you don't like the nominating committee, well, it is already there. If you think it's biased, it is already there. Now I'm giving you a big step forward, and since this is such a big step, there are bound to be uncertainties. Let's not change all the other things very much. Let's not change the composition. Let's stick with the same number, 1,200. Let's stick to the 4 sectors, So let's take this major step forward first, and then let's consider other changes when the system settles down and proves that itself is functioning well. Then we think about other changes. This is the original thinking of Beijing. Is it reasonable? Well, one could debate about it. At least the young people, and many young people in Hong Kong don't agree with it. The 13 scholars are all over 60, and we tend to agree with that. So this is the reality. You know, old people in Hong Kong are thinking, the young people are thinking very different from as compared to the old people. So what do? I guess, you know, the opinion poll that CK showed is very illustrative. And I think most of the people who say no are probably going to be the younger people. At least opinion polls show that the young people tend to have a lot higher percentage of no's. But then in the age of internet, in the age of, you know, all these chats on the internet, well, do you like the reasoning of the young people? That's, again, another debatable and controversial issue. But I think this is the set of complex political and public opinion and reasoning that we have to deal with. So in terms of the reason, I think most of the, well, I could only say this is I couldn't represent all the 13 people in my group, but I think I could safely say that the majority of our group people say that, well, it's better for Hong Kong, just on the basis of reason, that we take this package, at least we move one step forward. This is the traditional wisdom we have built up dealing with the bureaucrats in the mainland for a very long time, either on business, on politics, on all the issues. You deal with the bureaucrats in the mainland, you have to be very tactful. You don't insist on your own principles. You have to, you know, try to bargain with them in a very skillful way. And then you move an inch forward first, and then you wait for another opportunity, you move another inch forward. That's the traditional way of making things happen in the mainland. And that is the way how China's reform has moved forward so much in the last 35 years or so. And for people who are old enough to understand all this, you know, you think, wow, this is the way you need to do it, like it or not. But of course, you know, the world is, in the future, is going to be the young people's world. So I think we have to respect the views of the younger generation. And if, as CK Law showed very clearly, if adopting the package is going to generate a lot of people who are going to be mad, then it may not necessarily be the best decision for Hong Kong, unless you secure a much larger proportion. You know, the two-thirds majority, I think, has a reason behind it. And the two-thirds majority arrangement is actually there to help us to prevent, or at least ameliorate the problems that CK mentioned earlier on. If two-thirds of the population in Hong Kong, well, even they are mildly happier, then at least the one-third who are going to be mad has to respect that, well, two-thirds of the people are going to be mildly happier. So I think we have to work at the, you know, the public opinion, so that if you have two-thirds agreeing in the public opinion, then I think that will be a much stronger ground for the politicians and legislative council to pass. Otherwise, well, I'm not so sure what we should do.
Sure.
I just have a brief word, just in answer to what Eric says. I sense that Eric feels that I've been too harsh on the Pandemocrats. Perhaps I have been. It is not intended, but everybody who knows me know that I'm the sort of person who stand by reason, and not necessarily by those who are close to me. Bong lei but bong chan. And I just try to, you know, lay out the facts for people who want to share my view. Eric says that the Pandemocrats are not how I perceive them to be. Perhaps he knows them more than I do. I just want to say that. But I live with them on a day-to-day basis. I talk to each and every one of them, most of them, on a daily basis. I was a member of the Alliance for Genuine Universal Suffrage, which held meetings from I think the beginning of 2014 until the summer of 2014. In fact, I attended meeting right up to June. There were meetings every week. And I can tell you, I can assure you, if you look at the minutes, you'll see that apart from deciding that the Alliance would go for universal suffrage, every single time that we met, every week, was about how best we can prepare ourselves to support Occupy Central. In fact, it came to such a stage that I thought that we're only meeting for the purpose of Occupy Central. And that's when I started not attending those meetings. In none of those meetings did we ever have any kind of discussion or in-depth discussion about any of the 16 or 17 proposals which do not have civic nomination in them. So that's my personal experience, but perhaps I was wholly unfair. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Beijing is not to be blamed. Beijing has to bear the largest proportion of blame because they have the authority. They have the power. Even though they don't like Occupy Central, even though they don't like civic nomination, they don't have to put forward such a conservative package. So Beijing is more to blame. But in my mind, the Pan-Democrats are not free of blame. History would judge itself eventually.
Okay, this time I'm going to open up the floor. We have about 10-15 minutes for questions. Just to maximize that time, may I ask you to keep your questions short and indicate to whom you're addressing your question? Yes, this gentleman here. Do you see the light turned on?
There,
Yeah,
right.
good.
Our society has been polarized to an extent that it's difficult for us to be rational about a lot of things. But if we step back to look at what is happening now, Hong Kong probably is not ready for the vote that is, going to put to the Legislative Council. The figures that CK, showed us probably do not represent the truth, because there is some kind of a implicit unholy alliance between those who don't want the proposal passed and part of the establishment. Because there are a major sector of the establishment that would be no worse off, if not better off, if the proposal isn't passed. So, realistically, it may not be to the benefit of Hong Kong if we actually pass the proposal. There's the irony, because Hong Kong may not be ready for it. Now, my question is to Mr. Ronnie Tong. He said that there is no political party in Hong Kong. There are a lot of pressure groups, no political parties, but we know that there are a lot of organizations that carry the name parties. And he's going to organize a think tank with the aim of, say, educating or changing the mindset or the mentality of the political parties in Hong Kong. So I just want to know more about this, because, given what we have in the existing organizations called political parties, how would you be able to change the mindset? And in what way you're going to change the mindset that they would guide them toward the aim of becoming the ruling party in Hong Kong? Now, I think many political parties in Hong Kong do not think that they're going to be the ruling party someday, but I'm sure members of those parties would like to participate in the ruling game someday. So if it is only, say, with that kind of limited aim in mind for these people in the political parties, in what way you're going to change their mindset and mentality to the benefit of Hong Kong?
Well, I agree. We're between a rock and a hard place, and another way of putting it is that most of us are at wit's end. There are no alternatives which appear on the horizon, or there is no penicillin for this situation. But can I just tell you that when I formed the Civic Party, I was thinking exactly the same thing. At that time, we thought that there was a group of people, a large group of people, middle class, middle of the road, politically middle of the road people, who do not feel that they belong to any political party, or they can aspire to be members of any political party. And that's why I saw the void, and I said, look, let's form a party and grab these people. I failed miserably. It was a complete failure. It was a complete failure for 10 years. And I'm just still trying. I mean, I just want to have one more chance, perhaps one last chance. But the situation today is slightly different. I mean, I talk to a lot of people. There are a lot of people. There are a lot of, if not angry voices, unhappy voices in the community who long for a third way or a third approach. And when I went up to Beijing, you know, one of the Beijing officials said to me, he said, why didn't you try to do that 2 years ago? If you were to do that 2 years ago, perhaps we wouldn't be here. I said, 2 years ago, the conditions were not right. 2 years ago, people are still looking at the Pan-Democrats, thinking that they are the savior. They can lead us out of this morass. But we have now come to a situation, we think that unless there is major change in the community, we're going to end up in a dead end. And so the conditions are very different today. And when I first said that I want to form a think tank and an advocacy platform and try a third way, people say that we're moderates. As I said, I don't regard myself as a moderate. I just regard myself as pragmatic. And when I said I want to try this, a lot of people came up to me. And they say they wanted to do it. I got a whole group of young people, highly qualified young people, who got doctorate degrees, master degrees, who came up to me and say, look, I want to walk with you. I want to try this with you. So conditions maybe are changing. Now, it may be that it was a mirage. Maybe that at the end of the day, it all come to naught, as he had come to naught with Civic Party. But if you don't try, you never know. So let's try.
Okay. More questions? Or comments? Pooja?
I have a question for both Eric and Ronnie, and I think it's something I want to ask on behalf of the students. As we all know, many students went out of their way in the past year and really put themselves out there on the line, and it cost them many things on the personal and professional and other fronts. And I think something that Eric said really sort of struck a chord with me, and that is that you have this group who are very charged at the moment and have a lot of fervor, and you have to capitalize on that. And as you know, with the votes on withdrawing from the Student Federation and the post-Occupy aftermath, there are a lot of students who feel very lost, who come to faculty members and talk to us about sort of whether they failed in the one thing that they sort of fought for so passionately at such an early age. And then, you know, Ronnie, you talk about setting up this think tank as an advocacy platform, and Eric talks about the need to hold dear to our core values and build on those going forward. And I just wonder, are we losing critical time as we are just waiting for example, the vote and to set things up and then to start talking about our core values? Because there have been a lot of lost students around campus in these past few months who have had nowhere to go and don't know what to do. And maybe, Ronnie, that's what you see. You see an outreach of people saying, okay, I'll walk with you, because they really can't see where to put themselves right now. And I'm just thinking that what can be done now to motivate those students to stay engaged and not to lose hope? And I think it comes down to something that Dr. Kwok mentioned earlier, and that is that the expectations that people have been given, especially the young people, I think the reason they vote no and are so headstrong about it is because they have expected that this is the time for universal suffrage. This is their century. And they see this as a gross injustice that they're being denied. And that's why they went as far as they did, putting their careers and other things online. So I'm just thinking about in what ways do your proposals and ideas have room to engage the students immediately so that we don't lose any more time and have them feel sort of dislocated.
Indeed, Pooja raised a very good questions, but the problem of academic like me is that I only talk and no action. And the rare academics who have action like Benny Tai get into trouble. So To be frank, I think that's something that we need someone who can do it. I can only raise the idea. The idea is that I really hope to see that we can have more people who are willing to engage this younger generation. Even if you disagree with some of their actions, I think it's very important that they are our future. We can't give them up. We need both government and others who are prepared to engage them and to work with them and talk with them. I think, but I can only say this, but to be frank, don't ask me what I can do. I can only talk, no action.
I think I want to clarify one thing. I'm not saying that there is no debate about our core values. I've not mentioned anything about it. I'm not saying we should give it up. I mean, for God's sake, no. All I'm talking about this evening is about our mentality, our mindset as to how to preserve those core values which are dear to us. And I'm very happy to see students are passionate about politics nowadays. I mean, compared with my days, I mean, they're miles and miles ahead of what I was like when I was in Hong Kong University. And that's a good thing. But what I'm saying is that there are always more than two sides to one argument. You know, I'm a lawyer. That's how I look at things. And let us explore, around the peripheral of the vision that we seem to be looking at one thing very focused and perhaps ignoring other factors which are at play. And I'm saying that we should pay heed to other factors at play. Understand what are the priorities of China at the moment, how they look at things. If you know their weakness and the strong points of your adversary, you stand a better chance of succeeding. But at the same time, you should also know your own weaknesses. I'm trying to point out some of the weaknesses that we have, and Eric thinks that I'm being very harsh and critical of the Pan-Democrats. But I'm just trying to remind everybody, that's where we fail. Unless we know where we fail, how we fail, there is no possibility that we can succeed next time. That's all I'm trying to do.
Well, I'm not so sure whether this is relevant, but using my own personal experience, I worked in the government before I came to the university. I worked in the central government's office, and I was sitting in the central government offices, watching students and all these other people demonstrate before my office day after day. And in my university days, I was the guy who was sitting downstairs there, protesting against the officials sitting in those offices in those days. Of course, I was not a very radical. I was just, a student with some ideals, and I was actually rather leftist, if you want to use the modern word, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I guess this is part of the learning process when you grow up. Different people learn in different ways. But when you are so passionate about changing the world, when you are so passionate about ideals and what is right, what is wrong, how to make the world a better place and so on, you also go through a learning process. And that, well, of course, different people go through that learning process in different ways. In my personal circumstances, once I left the university and started to join the real world of work and started to, go through your personal growth stages, step by step, then you realize how simplistic your ideas were when you were a student. My personal experience was that gradually I started with how could I change the world? And then gradually I came down to how could I change the people and the things immediately around me successfully and realistically. It is a very big swing. It may not be the right way to think about it for some people, but I think that is a very important aspect. If you do your job well, very professionally, very ethically, it is already a major achievement. If you treat your people around you well, if you do your family, become a very responsible and a wonderful father and you are already a very, very good man. Don't just talk high ideals and do things in a lousy way. Well, that is my personal learning. I guess when young people talk with me these days, I also tend to make them feel that, well, ideals are good. Because all the people I knew when I was young who had big ideals, most of them turned out to be very good people. They may succeed in different ways, they may fail in different ways, but they're all good people. They have their ethical standards, they have their values that will stick with them for a very long time.
I'm not worried about the young people. We were classmates at the university. But very, very, very different. I was very active during my secondary school days. I participated in demonstrations. I can't remember the numbers. I participated in the process of trying to seek Chinese being the official language of Hong Kong. But once I get into the university, I stop everything because I'm so frustrated. But I get back to politics after 40. So I'm not worried about young people. They learn, they have the lessons, and they still have a long way, a lot of things they have to learn. And one way or the other, they will become the master of this society.
I think that's a great way to end our seminar. I think we've had a very open and pragmatic discussion about moderation in political reform. And Ronnie, I wish you all the best on Sunday. Look forward to the fireworks.
Luck has nothing to do with it.
So with that, I want to thank all of our speakers for coming today. And I want to thank all of you, and ask all of you to join me in thanking all the speakers. Thanks a lot, Ronnie. That's great.